I started writing this 11 times. I know that because I have 11 different documents on my laptop, each one titled some variation of Subway or That Night, or in one particularly dramatic late night attempt, The Thing I Can't Stop Seeing. Each one gets a few paragraphs in and then I close it without saving, which means I've told myself this story 11 times and deleted it 11 times, which might be its own kind of problem. This time, I'm not closing it. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I am 34 years old, I live in Chicago now, and 8 years ago I was living in New York City and I watched the man get beaten nearly to death on a subway platform while I stood 6 feet away and did not move. That is a sentence I have been unable to write for 8 years. I just wrote it. I'm going to keep going. I need to set the scene properly because I think context matters, and also because I have replayed this scene so many times in my head that it has taken on the hyper clarity of a film. Every detail lit and sharp in a way that real memory usually isn't. It was a Wednesday night in October. I was 26 years old and I had been living in New York for about 14 months, which was long enough to feel like I knew how the city worked, but not long enough to actually know how the city worked. I was coming home from a work event, not a party exactly, more of a networking thing at a bar in Midtown that I hadn't wanted to attend and had stayed at too long, because I kept thinking I should stay longer. I'd had 2 drinks, maybe 3. I was not drunk. I was tired and mildly socially drained and thinking about the leftover pasta in my refrigerator. The 2-train platform at Times Square at 11 on a Wednesday is not empty, but it's not packed. There's a particular texture to a subway platform at that hour. The sound carries differently. You're aware of the other people in a way you're not during rush hour, because there are few enough of them to be individuals. I remember there were maybe 30 people on that platform. I remember the particular yellow of the overhead lights. I remember the smell, which is the smell of all subway platforms, a combination of metal and old air, and something biological that you learn to stop noticing after a few months in the city. I was standing about midway down the platform. I had my phone out. I was looking at nothing in particular. The man was standing near the edge, about 20 feet from me. I noticed him before anything happened, which I've thought about a lot since. He was in his 50s, I guessed, with the kind of build that suggested he had been physically strong earlier in his life, and was still carrying the frame of it. He was wearing a light jacket, gray or blue. The color shifted in my memory over the years, and I've stopped trusting it. He had a paper bag in one hand, the kind from a deli or a bodega. He was just standing there, waiting for the train, the way everyone was waiting for the train. He looked at me. Just briefly, the kind of eye contact strangers make on subway platforms, checking orientation, confirming existence. I looked back and then looked at my phone, the way you do. That was maybe 40 seconds before it started. There were 3 of them. Young, late teens or very early 20s, I thought. They moved onto the platform from the stairwell in a way that felt purposeful in retrospect, though I didn't register it as purposeful at the time. They moved toward the man near the edge, and I registered them the way you register anything on a subway platform at 11 at night, neutrally, without interpretation. I cannot tell you the exact moment I understood what was happening. There was no clear before and after. There was just the ordinary texture of the platform, and then there was the sound of impact, and the man went down. It happened fast, and it happened slowly at the same time, which I know sounds contradictory, but it's the most accurate description I have. The actual event, the physical event, was fast, faster than you would think, faster than it happens in movies, which always show violence as something measured and dramatic. This was abrupt and chaotic and loud in a way that didn't make cinematic sense. But my experience of it was slow. I remember each separate second. I remember the man going down and the sound of his head hitting the concrete platform, and the paper bag from the deli hitting the ground a second later, and I remember seeing the contents. I think I saw a container of soup and an apple that rolled towards the yellow edge of the platform and stopped about an inch from the drop. I remember the 3 of them continuing after he was down. I won't describe it in more detail than that. I watched it happen. I stood 6 feet away and I watched it happen. And here is the thing, the true and awful and inexcusable thing, I did not move. I've spent 8 years trying to understand why I didn't move. Not to excuse it. I want to be clear about that. I'm not looking for a framework that makes me a victim of my own neurology. I did something wrong, and I know I did something wrong. And the understanding I'm looking for is not absolution. It's just understanding, because not understanding something that defines you is its own particular torture. Here's what I know about why I didn't move. I was afraid. That's the first and honest answer. 3 people were actively hurting a man, and I was one person, and the math of that was, in my body, not my brain, prohibitive. I also froze. There's a documented physiological response to witnessing sudden violence, a kind of lockdown that the body initiates before the conscious mind catches up. I know this because I have read about it extensively, and I know it's real, and I also know it is not a complete answer, because I stayed frozen for a long time, long enough that the freeze stopped being physiological and became a choice. I looked around me. That's the part I return to most often. When my brain came back online, 5 seconds in, 10 seconds, I don't know, the first thing I did was look around at the other people on the platform. I was not the only one standing there. There were 30 people. I looked at the nearest person, a woman about my age, and she was looking at me, and we made eye contact, and neither of us moved. There's a thing called the bystander effect. You have probably heard of it. It's the well-documented phenomenon where the presence of other witnesses to an emergency decreases the likelihood that any individual will intervene, because each person assumes someone else will act, because diffusion of responsibility makes inaction feel rational, because in a crowd, doing nothing feels less like a choice and more like a consensus. I know all of this. I knew some of it even then. I'm a reasonably intelligent person who understood on some level what was happening in that moment, why no one was moving, why 30 people were watching. Knowing why you're failing doesn't stop you from failing. The 3 of them left the way they had come, quickly, through the stairwell, and then they were gone, and the man was on the platform, and the apple was 1 inch from the drop, and none of us had moved. Someone called 911. I don't know who. Not me. Not in those first seconds. I heard someone on the platform saying they were calling. I heard the word ambulance. By the time I had crossed the 20 feet to where the man was lying, there were other people there too, crouching down, someone saying his name, which they had found on an ID they'd pulled from his jacket pocket. I crouched down next to him. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know first aid beyond the vague memory of a course I'd taken in high school. I put my hand on his shoulder, which was a useless gesture, and I said something, I don't remember what, and his eyes were open but unfocused, and there was blood, more than I expected. The paramedics came in what felt like both 4 minutes and 40 minutes. A police officer came and took brief statements from several people on the platform. I gave mine. I said I had seen 3 young men attack him. I described them as best I could. I did not say I had stood there for the duration without moving. The officer didn't ask, and I didn't offer. The man was alive. That's what the paramedics said to someone near me as they loaded him. Alive. I took a cab home. I didn't take the 2 train. I sat in the back of a cab and I looked at the city going by, and I thought, I stood 6 feet away. I thought, he looked at me before it happened. He made eye contact with me the way strangers do on subway platforms, and then 40 seconds later, I stood 6 feet from him and did not move. I ate the leftover pasta. I am not proud of that, but it is what happened. I sat at my kitchen table and I ate cold pasta because my body was hungry. And I ate it, and then I went to bed and I lay there until about 4 in the morning. I did not talk about it. Not to my roommate, not to my friends, not to my family. I went to work the next day. I went back to using the subway within a week because there was no other viable option. I stood on platforms and looked at the yellow line and felt nothing that I was willing to feel, and kept going. But I thought about it constantly, in the way that unprocessed things live just below the surface, not always front of mind, but always present, always applying pressure. I developed a specific anxiety about subway platforms that I still have. I became hyper aware of groups of young men in public spaces in a way that I recognized as unfair and couldn't stop. I got short-tempered and then went quiet, and the woman I was dating for most of the year after it happened told me when she ended things that she felt like she couldn't reach me. I didn't tell her why. I moved to Chicago 2 years later. I told myself and everyone else it was for a job, which was partly true. It was also true that I needed to not be on platforms where the 2 train ran. 6 years after it happened, 2 years ago, I found out who he was. This is the part I haven't told anyone. I was on a local news website, one of those recursive late-night internet spirals that starts somewhere coherent and ends in a strange place, and I came across an article from a few years earlier about a nonprofit organization that ran literacy programs in underserved communities in the Bronx. The article had a photo of the organization's founder. I knew his face immediately, the same way you know a song you haven't heard in years. Instantly, in your whole body, before your mind has even processed it. His name was Gerald. He was 61 in the photo. He had started the organization after his own difficult history with education as a child, and had spent 2 decades running programs that had served, by the article's count, thousands of kids. He was alive. He had survived. More than survived. He had kept going. I sat at my desk at midnight and I read the article 4 times. I found the organization's website. I found Gerald's name listed as executive director. I found a contact form. I spent 6 weeks composing a message to send through that form. I wrote it and rewrote it and deleted it and started over more times than I can count. I wanted to say, I was there. I wanted to say, I am so sorry I didn't move. I wanted to say, I have thought about you for 6 years and I found you, and you built something extraordinary, and I am so glad you're alive. I never sent it. I've thought a lot about why. The most honest answer is that I was afraid the contact would be for me, not for him. That reaching out would be a way of unburdening myself at his expense, asking him to process a stranger's guilt about the worst night of his life. He didn't need that. He had built a life and a mission and an organization. He had moved forward in a way that I hadn't, and showing up in his inbox to confess my paralysis felt like making his trauma about my healing. So I didn't send it. I just knew he was alive. I knew his name. I knew what he built. I donated to the organization. I've donated every year since. That might be the most pathetic sentence in this entire account. The guy who froze on the platform sends a check every December. But it's what I have. It doesn't absolve anything. It's not meant to. It's just the one thing I could do that was for him and not for me. Here's what I've never been able to answer. If I had moved, if I had shouted, if I had run at them, if I had done anything in those first seconds, would it have changed the outcome? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe they would have scattered. Maybe there would have been a ripple effect, the way bystander intervention works sometimes. One person moves, and then others move, and suddenly the dynamic shifts. Maybe I would have gotten hurt. Maybe nothing would have changed at all. I don't know. I will never know. That not knowing is part of what I carry. The other part is simpler and harder. I am a person who stood 6 feet away. Whatever else I am, whatever I've done since, whatever I've built, whoever I've become, I am also that. Both things are true, and both things will always be true. And I have spent 8 years trying to figure out how to live inside that, and I'm still figuring it out. I'm 34 years old. I take the train to work every day. I stand on platforms and I think about what I would do now if it happened again. I've played it through 1,000 times. I've imagined myself moving. I've imagined being different. I think I would move now. I believe that. I'm not certain. But I know I wouldn't look away. And I know his name is Gerald. And I know he built something that helped thousands of kids learn to read. And I know that every December I write a check, and I sit with what I did and what I didn't do, and I try to be honest with myself about the distance between those two things. The apple stopped 1 inch from the edge. I think about that a lot. 1 inch.